We're happy and fortunate to have Tanner Camp visiting with us. He is an attorney at Foley and Lardner so far. He was an undergraduate in political science and Russian, still true, at BYU. I didn't write this down as I was talking to him. And then he went to law school at UVA. And after that, he clerked. And after that, he has been at big law firms ever since. And the facts about him otherwise are that he has 3 children, and they all go skiing. And he also travels many miles for boutique food destinations that you can ask him for recommendations about in any area adjoining the 7 peaks along the Wasatch Front. I'm somewhat dramatizing this.
Somewhat, that's all right.
They can ask questions about the peaks, the hiking, the skiing, or the food, in addition to being a lawyer. But this is a good one to have as a sort of like at the start of the semester, because many people in political science consider going to law school. So it's good just to see someone who is on that track. And so we're happy to have him visiting with us today.
Thank you. Me. This is a little surreal because I can remember, I feel like it was like yesterday I was sitting in this room and listening to lectures. So I kind of feel, I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Billy Madison. There's a scene in Billy Madison where he kind of grabs the kid's face and he says, "Stay here as long as you can," right? When talking about staying in high school, and that's kind of what I want to do to you guys, because it's just a great opportunity to be here and to be learning and trying out new things and listening to lectures and things like that. It's a fun time of life. So don't take it for granted. So let me talk a little bit about. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Foley and Lardner, just kind of so you can get a sense for what type of lawyer I am and where I'm working right now. So Foley and Lardner is an international law firm that's been around for about 180 years. It's technically based in Milwaukee. But I would say the kind of de facto hub, a little bit of Chicago now, at least for litigation, and I'll get into a little bit more about the breakdown between litigation and corporate law a little bit later. But I work in the Salt Lake City office of Foley and Lardner. That office opened up about 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, and it's thriving. The firm is still growing. We just added a Nashville office. We have about 1,100 attorneys at the firm nationwide. There's also some international offices. And we do just about everything. A full-service law firm. We do a lot of healthcare law, a lot of IP law, a lot of labor and employment, but I'll get into some of those a little bit later. So, okay. I want to start off just by talking about, why become a lawyer. I'll give you kind of the top 3 things that I think are reasons why you become a lawyer. The first is the versatility of the profession. So, there are so many things that you can do with a law degree, right? We think of like the typical, I watch Law and Order and I'm going to be a lawyer. That's what you do with a law degree. That's part of it, but there's so many other things you can do with it, and not just law related, right? There are a lot of CEOs, business officials that have JDs. And that might start out doing a traditional law career, but then venture into more of the business world. Government officials, politicians, right? Like a lawyer is a very typical background for those individuals. Sports agents, and then obviously just being your bread and butter lawyer. There's also the public sector versus the private sector, right? There's a lot of things you can do in the public sector, whether you want to be a public defender or a prosecutor. Or the private sector kind of thing, what I do, work for a big law firm or work for a company as an in-house lawyer. So there's just a lot of things that you can do with it. One of the reasons why I chose ultimately to go to law school is because I was afraid that if I chose some of the other careers I was considering, I would get bored. And I felt like with law, if I'm doing one path and I get bored with it, I can go down another path. And it's still available to me. The second thing that I think the reason to pursue a law degree or a legal career is a sharp learning curve. So I had I started off my career after clerking for a judge. I started at a litigation boutique in Southern California. And a litigation boutique is just a fancy way to say that it's a smaller law firm that does only litigation. They don't do anything else. They kind of specialize in trial work. And when I was leaving that firm, the named partner kind of told me, one of the things, the piece of advice he passed along to me is he said, just make sure whatever you do, you always keep your learning curve sharp. And that's one of the things that I think that a legal career provides for you. You're always learning new things, right? Like people always ask me questions about, and they think like, well, you're a lawyer, you know the legal answer to this obscure question, and I almost always have to say, I'll get you an answer, but in a few days, right? Because like there's so many things that the law is so wide and broad, and there's so many things to know about it that you can learn forever, and that can be a little bit intimidating, but it also is exciting because you'll never get bored. One of the things that I always say is that at least in my aspect of the law, you become a mini expert in all sorts of topics. So depending on what case you're working on, I had a case that I was working on in California where the subject of the lawsuit were these things called antibody drug conjugates, and I didn't know what those words meant in isolation, let alone together, before I started that case, right? But it was a novel way of fighting cancer. I learned all about that case in the context of, a business partner claiming his former partner took all the trade secrets of the business and took them somewhere else and started a competing business, But you have to learn enough about the underlying technology so that you can talk to a judge, you can, dumb it down enough to where you can present it in a way that at least you look like you know what you're talking about, even if you maybe don't. And then when that case settles, you purge that information and you go to another case where you become an expert in the environmental effects of mine spills, right? So it just is, you're always learning, you're always thinking about new things, you're becoming a mini expert in these areas. And then the third thing is you get to argue for a living, right? You're actually encouraged to argue and do that. But I say that a little bit tongue in cheek, but also serious in the sense that, there's a rush that you get by, taking a bunch of information about a case, synthesizing it down to something that's digestible, that's understandable, that you're going to educate a judge or a jury and get up there and essentially perform, right? You get up there and you really are presenting your case in a bit of a performative way, so that you're not putting anyone to sleep, so they understand what you're saying, and so that they ultimately decide in favor of your client. So in that way, it's a little bit like putting together a puzzle, and you're always trying to find out the facts, the nuances, the interesting aspects of your case that are going to eventually down the road help you prevail and represent your client in a good and effective manner. So those are kind of the top three things, at least I'd say for me, why a legal career is if those things interest you, why a legal career can be very fulfilling. Let me talk a little bit about the divide, the main divide in legal careers, and that's the difference between a transactional or a corporate lawyer and a litigator. Have you guys heard those terms before? Yeah, okay. So I did not know what a transactional lawyer was before I started law school. I still don't quite know what a transactional lawyer does, but I'm going to try to explain it the best that I can. So again, this is kind of the main categorical divide that you'll hear when you go to law school. People will ask you, do you want to do litigation or do you want to do corporate law? And so it's helpful to at least have kind of an idea on what you want to do. But also law school is kind of the place to figure out, which one do you like better. But I just want to give you some characteristics of both to kind of help you orient yourself. So a transactional lawyer or a corporate lawyer, these are business lawyers. These are lawyers for where negotiating is key. Negotiating skills are you're using them every single day. I would say that this type of lawyer is more of a builder. You're usually helping clients build their businesses. You are securing real estate for your clients. You are helping people engage in partnerships or licensing arrangements to where you're trying to build something. You're trying to create something. There are opposing sides in this type of law, but not in the way that you would think about opponents, right? You're working together. So, for example, if I'm a transactional lawyer, I'm representing my client. The opposing counsel is representing their client, but we're trying to get a deal done, right? We're trying to either create a business or we're trying to secure a real estate transaction. So we're trying to work together to get it done. And we're representing our clients zealously, but we're still working together. These types of lawyers include those that, if you've heard like terms like mergers and acquisitions, there's a lot of corporate lawyers that do that. Venture capital, real estate transactions, tax lawyers would fall into this bucket as well. So those are all types of, what I call transactional or corporate lawyers. So the second category, the second part of that divide is litigation. Litigation or litigators are more the type of lawyers that you see on TV, right? These are more the traditional, typical, what you think of when you think of a lawyer. So what are some of your guys' favorite legal dramas? Anyone like any legal shows that they like?
Better Call Saul.
Better Call Saul, it's a great one. Anyone else? How to Get Away with Murder. Good. Suits. There's a lot, right? Suits, Law and Order, that's one that, there's so many iterations of it. It's been on forever. White Collar, Legally Blonde, Liar, right? That we can get into all sorts of movies too about the legal profession, right? So most of the time, the lawyers that you're seeing in these, dramas and things like that are different types of litigators. So whereas I said before, a transactional lawyer is more of a builder, litigators are, conflict is the name of the game. You are engaged in conflict all the time. Now, a lot of lawyers, I think, or a lot of litigators think that, well, because I'm, I have an opposing side, I have conflict, I have to be a jerk, and that's not true. You don't have to be a jerk. You don't have to be rude to people. You don't have to, be cutting in order to be effective as a litigator. You can be cordial, you can be nice, and still represent your clients in a very effective way. But these are the types of lawyers that you would think of in terms of like criminal lawyers, family attorneys, so divorce, adoptions, custody battles, labor and employment. They can straddle the boundary a little bit. Some are more on the transactional side. Some are more litigators. IP litigators, you know what IP litigators are? So intellectual property. So that's stuff like patent attorneys, when you're fighting over patents. Trade secrets are soft IP, but copyright, trademark, things like that, where you're fighting over intellectual property. So that's all litigation. So let me tell you just a little bit about what I do now that you kind of know those two divides. So I am a litigator. I do what's called commercial litigation is kind of the main bread and butter that I do. And that is just a fancy way of saying any time that there's a dispute of a commercial nature, right? A commercial nature or a business nature. So when businesses are fighting over contracts or when they are suing each other over, misappropriation of trade secrets, when maybe there's a business divorce, right? So where you have two partners who are splitting up the business and fighting over who gets what. Those are all commercial litigation cases. I also I have a subspecialty of labor and employment. So I also do some labor and employment, which more on the litigation side than like the counseling side. But that's when essentially you have employees who are either, suing their employers for discrimination or wage and hour type claims, or when you have employers going after their employees for violating non-competition agreements or anything that touches the relationship between employer and employee, which there are a lot of regulations that you have to be careful about there. Okay, so let me transition a little bit to kind of how you start down the path of going to law school and becoming a lawyer. So there's no one right way to do this, but I'm just going to give you some of the things that I found helpful when I was deciding whether to be a lawyer and deciding how to go about doing that. So the first thing I'll talk about is my least favorite, so I'll get it out of the way, is LSAT prep. So if anyone ever done any, test LSATs or anything like that? Yeah? Some a little bit? Okay. The LSAT is horrible, and it's the worst test until you have to take the bar exam. So there's lots of fun tests in your future if you decide to go this way. But the one thing about the LSAT though is it's also learnable, if that makes sense. It's a test that is if you practice, you will get better. And so, if you do want to go to law school, LSAT scores are really important. In some respects, they can be more important than grades, right? And so you want to give that test the attention that it's due. I took a prep course with a place called ACE Test Prep that I really liked. I don't know if it still exists, but you can check it out if it does. It was really good. And he basically teaches you how to do the test, because there is a strategy to it. There's a section on it called the games section, where you really can learn how to play the games, and they just give you different fact patterns, but as long as you know the rules of the game, you can learn how to do those really easily. So anyway, focus on the LSAT. Don't give yourself plenty of time if you're working up to it. Give yourself time to take it multiple times if you want to. That's one thing. I only took it once, and I wish I would have built in enough time to take it again. The other thing that I thought was super helpful for me were internships. So there's a lot of things that you can do, to kind of find out about what type of law you're interested in and what type of law you might want to pursue. And you can do that right now. When I was in undergrad, I worked for a family law attorney as just a file clerk. So I did a bunch of his filings. I would, organize files for him, get things ready for court when he'd go to court. And it was great attorney, really, really liked him. I learned that I never want to do family law. It's for some people it's very rewarding and they like it, but for me I was like, nope, that's not what I want to do. And so, but that was valuable in and of itself, right, to go there and kind of figure that out. Another thing that I did in undergrad was I interned for the Provo Justice Court here in Provo. I think that they still have kind of an informal intern program that you can go do, where you go in and watch court, you help the judge prepare for hearings, and get to kind of see how the justice court works. The justice court is generally handling the lowest level of criminal proceedings, and then also small claims. So lawsuits that are relatively small in terms of money value, and then misdemeanors, B and C misdemeanors, and like traffic infractions and things like that. So, but there's lots of different things you can do, right? You can go work for a law firm. You can. I did a legal internship back in D.C. when I was here at BYU. Did they sub Washington Seminar? Washington Seminar. It was a great experience for me. So there's lots of different things you can do to figure out if law is kind of the thing for you. There are also pre-law societies. I know BYU has the pre-law society here. That was super helpful for me to kind of learn how to, what the journal writing process is like, and get more acquainted with legal writing, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. But what I want you to kind of take from and the other thing is just to talk to lawyers, right? Talk to people who've done it before. Again, I kind of compare, lawyers to doctors in the sense that there's all sorts of types of doctors, right? So you wouldn't want to go to your dermatologist to do heart surgery on you, right? Like there are so many different types of doctors, and that's kind of how lawyers are, right? That they specialize in different things, and if you go to your tax lawyer and say, hey, I just got sued, like, what do I do? Your tax lawyer is probably going to be like, I'm going to refer you to a litigator or something like that, right? So talk to different lawyers. Chances are some in your life, and chances are they probably do different things. And so there were a few lawyers in my life who I just kind of latched on to. I had no lawyers in my family. And so I would, talk to these individuals. I'd talk to them about law school decisions. I would talk to them about all sorts of things law related, and they were super helpful in kind of guiding me and helping me figure out how to write position statements and how to do my applications and what types of things to focus on. And one of the things that I took from talking to all these lawyers, and I think this is super helpful, is that there's not one right way to be a lawyer, right? One of the things that I learned a bit of the hard way is at my first law firm, there was a guy who was he was a little bit of my mentor. I really looked up to him, and he was a really good lawyer. but he was super aggressive, right? Like he was just like, he knew how to like deliver the most like cutting remarks. He knew how to really just like dig in and was very, very aggressive. When I tried to be like that, it came off as disingenuous because it wasn't really my personality, right? And I thought like, well, he's a good lawyer and that's how he is. That's how I have to be in order to be a good lawyer. And that's just not true. You can really lean into the things that make you, the strengths that you have. Right? I'm very detail oriented, and that is a strength that I can bring to the table when you're dealing with a case that involves a lot of small details, an intricate timeline, where you need to remember those things and you need to recall them, when the partner on the case is saying, oh, I remember this one document that talks about this, and you have to be like, yep, I got it, here it is, and so just there are things that you can lean into the skills that you have, and chances are it probably is a skill that's valuable for some type of lawyer. Okay, let me talk to you a little bit about just a typical day so you kind of get a sense for what I do on a typical day. So I'll go into work, and the very first thing that I generally do is I'll put in my time, and I'll explain what that is. So as not all lawyers, but generally lawyers who work at a private law firm and are working for clients that hire them on like a case-by-case basis, you're charging by the hour, right? So I have to keep track of all the time that I'm billing on a particular client or case. And people always joke that lawyers always think in 6-minute intervals, right? Because you're always billing, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4 of an hour. And so this is just part of this is the nature of being a lawyer at a private law firm. It's also one of the things that lawyers hate the most about their profession, is having to always be billing their time and keeping track of it and things like that. But what I'll do is I'll usually go in, I'll put in my time from the day before, I'll enter it, and I'll kind of finalize it. I'll clean up my emails, I'll kind of do my to-do list of like, okay, these are the things that I need to finish today or accomplish today. And then I'll go to it. So a typical day will generally include client calls. So especially after COVID, right, we do a lot of video conferencing calls with clients, and whether that be preparing for depositions or strategy calls about certain aspects of the case. I do a lot of pre-litigation counseling with clients about employment matters. So, for example, if a client wants to fire an individual because the individual engaged in some sort of conduct at work that's inappropriate, we get on a call, we talk about, okay, who is this person? What are this person's characteristics? What happened? Sometimes we talk to, other people at the workplace to kind of get a broader perspective. And then we counsel them on how they can go about either terminating that person or whether they should not terminate that person, and things like that. I also do a lot of what are called meet and confers. Lawyers also hate these, generally, litigators. When you have to meet and confer with opposing counsel, you kind of basically have a meeting. We usually do it by video conference, where you discuss and try to work out some conflict you have before taking it to the judge. So, for example, if I'm in a case and I've asked for all the text messages related to a specific thing from this attorney's client, right? And this client says, no, I'm not giving you those text messages. We have to meet and confer. We have to meet face to face. We have to talk about it. I have to say, listen, I'm entitled to these text messages because they're relevant because X, Y, Z. And he'll say, no, you're not entitled to these text messages. It's too much of a burden for me to produce them. They're privileged. They're whatever, right? He'll give all sorts of. You'll give your arguments. The opposing counsel will give her arguments. And then, if you can't solve it at a meet and confer, you bring it before the judge in some sort of motion or proceeding where you ask the judge to, weigh in on what your side is, what their side is, and then make a call. The other thing that leads into the next thing, court hearings, right? So, hearings don't happen that often, but generally once a week there's at least some sort of hearing that's before a judge. Again, after COVID, a lot of those transferred over into virtual hearings. So a lot of times on like smaller stuff, judges will have you appear virtually. But it's going back, the pendulum's swinging back a little bit to where more stuff is being in person. So that's when you go, you have to go down to the courthouse, you check in, you appear before a judge, you make your arguments, they ask their questions, and again, you hope for the best and hope that you can prevail for your client. Another huge part of being, of my day is writing and researching. So if you don't like to write, at least a litigator in my position is probably not the best place to be, because writing is super important. There are other types of lawyers, like, a criminal lawyer, you're probably not going to do as much writing. You'll do some, but you're going to be doing more in the court experience. You're going to be before judges on your feet a lot more. But writing is super important, and a lot of people think that legal writing it has a bad rap for being super dry and super boring, basically, and a lot of times it is. But I worked for a lawyer down in L.A. when I was in California he was a big entertainment lawyer, right? The type of lawyer that you would think of when you're thinking like L.A., Hollywood, like representing studios, and he had a bunch of, celebrity clients and everything like that. And he was so good at making legal writing interesting, right? And it was the first time when I had read it and just been like, oh wow, like I actually want to read this and I want to figure out what happens, because he presented it in a way that was technically sound and was, legally sound, but was also interesting for the judge and for the reader. Because what you have to realize is that usually when you are coming before a judge, especially if it's a state court judge as opposed to a federal court judge, they are super busy, right? They have a huge caseload. It's a very broad caseload. They may hear, criminal proceedings in the morning, and then in the afternoon they'll hear civil proceedings. And because the law is so broad, a judge really just has to pivot from one thing to the next to the next. And so the more you can, as a lawyer, present things in a way that you're basically spoon-feeding the judge, right? You're making it super easy for the judge to say, okay, I understand what the law is. I understand what you're telling me about the facts of your case and how that applies to the law. Okay, I'm ready to make my decision, right? And so your writing becomes super important. And then the other part of my day is engaging in what's called discovery. So discovery it's a long part of the case. It deals with basically trying to figure out the facts that you need to support your position, right? And that discovery can take the form of asking, like I said, for text messages, emails, documents, all sorts of written communications that you think will support your case, or it can also be depositions. So that's when you are sitting, you basically question a person under oath before trial, right? So you meet in a conference room somewhere, you have someone there taping it, someone transcribing it, and you ask all the questions you want to this person under oath. This person is usually represented by their own attorney who can object to your questions, and you basically try to uncover facts that are going to help you in your case later on. So, okay, let me just turn back to one thing about legal writing. I know we talked about it a little bit more, but I want to talk about it in a little bit more detail. So this is a skill, like I said before, that's super important, right? And so, and one thing that I like about legal writing and about writing in general is it's something that you can never be perfect at, right? You can always be improving with your writing. I remember when I was clerking for a judge in Portland. So after law school, I went to clerk for a federal judge, which basically is like, I'd say it's a paid internship after law school. Again, I'll compare it to like residency for med school, except it's much, much shorter. It's only for a year, maybe two. And you essentially work for a judge. You help him or her with trials. You help them with, when things are coming in, you have both sides arguing, okay, this is what I want, and the other side says, this is what I want. You take both of those things and you research the law yourself, and you make recommendations to the judge, and you say, okay, I think party A is right, I think party B is wrong, or you say, I think they're both wrong, here's the answer, right? So I remember after that, the judge that I worked for was a really good writer, really good at being synthesizing things and being super brief in his writing. Okay, That's one of the things I think misconceptions that at least lawyers have, right? That they always think longer is better, and that's not true, right? Brevity is huge, and it's much harder to be brief than it is to be long-winded, right? To just kind of like put all your stuff out there and be like, okay, I put all my arguments, it's this long, go ahead, judge, and read it. Judges don't have time, right? So you want to be brief, you want to be succinct, you want to be clear, and you want to be pointed. So that's something he was really good at. And I remember after I clerked for him, I thought, well, I know what I need to know. I'm a really great writer. I quickly found out that that was not true, right? Because then when you go to be a lawyer where you're advocating for your client as opposed to just calling balls and strikes like a judge is, it's a much different type of writing, right? Advocacy and trying to promote your client's position is much different, and you have to learn how to do it in kind of a different way. But I do want to talk about one thing that is, this is super basic and it gets much more complicated than this, and obviously this is just kind of a building block. But one of the things you learn in law school is what some people call the IRAC method, some people call it the CRAC or the crack method, some people call it the CIRAC method, but it's basically, variations of the same thing. And so I always use what's called the crack method. So it's conclusion, rule, application, conclusion. All right, that's kind of how you organize legal writing from a very macro level, right? After you kind of get it down, then you can deviate from it a little bit, but that's the building block. And let me explain a little bit further. So let's say that my argument that I'm trying to make is that, Tillamook ice cream is the best ice cream out there on the market. Okay, that's the argument that I'm trying to advocate for, and that I'm trying to get a judge to agree with me with. Okay, so conclusion, right? I'd say Tillamook ice cream is the best ice cream on the market. Rule, that's when you apply and you talk about what the rule is. You say, based on, and usually what you're doing in legal writing is talking about what other courts have said, right? Other courts or what the statutes say, what the Constitution says, right? So I'd say, based on surveys of, a randomized survey of 100 people, they concluded the best ice cream is ice cream that is creamy, ice cream that has unique flavors, and ice cream that is readily available. Just making that up, right? That's the rule that you determine, by which you determine whether the ice cream is good, bad, or the best, right? The application is where you apply the facts of your case to the rule as announced by statute, courts, the Constitution, whatever your legal authority is. So that's where you'd say Tillamook ice cream is the best because it fits all these qualifications. It's creamy. It has unique flavors such as XYZ, campfire s'mores. I just saw that one the other day. That one looked good. It's readily available. It's in these grocery stores. So anyways, it's where you're applying whatever the facts of your case are to the law that you just told to the judge. This is the rule, right? And then at the very end, you then apply another conclusion, right? You say, essentially, therefore, thus, whatever, Tillamook ice cream is the best ice cream on the market, right? And so that's, like I said, sometimes people will call that the IRAC method. They'll say instead of conclusion, rule, application, conclusion, it'll be issue, rule, application, conclusion. But it's essentially variations of the same thing. And that's an important structure to keep within your, they're called legal briefs, right? So to keep within your legal brief in general, but also to keep within like your paragraph structure. And so from a macro and a micro level, writing is important. Anyway, I've talked a lot, and I want to let you guys ask some questions. I'd rather focus on things that you guys find interesting and how I can help in terms of, letting you know or demystify the process a little bit of going to law school and becoming a lawyer. So if you have any questions, please ask away.
How much does it matter which law school you go to?
That's
in terms of getting a career?
Very good question, and I meant to cover that, so I'm glad you asked it. The law school you go to really matters. So I keep comparing it to med school. It's probably just because I am insecure that I'm a lawyer and not a doctor or something. But I'm gonna keep comparing it to med school because I think it's an apt comparison. Whereas with med school, and I'm going a little bit off of just my own experience with friends that have gone to med school and things like that, it doesn't quite matter as much, right, where you go to med school. Sometimes it does if you want to be in like the most prestigious residency or things like that. But generally, if you go to, a med school, it's hard enough to just get into med school that it doesn't matter as much kind of where you go. Law school is a little bit different. Law school, it'd be really easy to get into just any law school, right? There are lots of law schools across the country, and they really range in terms of good to bad. So here's what I'll say. It does really matter depending on what you want to do, right? So if you want to have the most options available to you, you say, I don't know exactly where I want to live, right? I want to be able to live in DC, New York, LA, but I'm not sure yet. And I want to work for like the most prestigious law firms out there. The law school you go to is going to matter a lot, right? Because they're going to really be recruiting at and looking at people who go to top 14 law schools, right? But if you say, well, I know I want to be a criminal lawyer, and I want to work for a public defender's office or a prosecutor's office, those lawyers, you're generally not going to get paid as much as if you were working for a private law firm. And so maybe cost is more important to you at that point, right? And so I'm not going to go to a law school that I'm paying $60,000 a year, on student loans because I don't know if I'll be able to, pay that back. I'm going to go to a little bit cheaper law school, one that I have a scholarship to, or something like that. It also depends on where you want to be geographically, right? So, and I'll just kind of say my piece a little bit on where I was trying to choose between going to law school at UVA or staying here at BYU. And both great law schools in their own respects, right? And in my mind, though, I wasn't sure that I wanted to. And BYU has a great international footprint, or excuse me, national footprint. They send people other places as well. But at the time, I thought, well, I'm going to go to UVA because I'm not totally sure that I want to stay in Utah. At the time, I wanted to work in DC, and so. UVA placed a ton of people in Washington, D.C., and they had a really good, employment rate coming out of law school, and so that's why I decided to go. But it was a much more expensive decision than staying at BYU, right? And so if you know, for example, you want to work in a particular market like, LA, going to UCLA or USC or something like that in the market is a really good choice, and it's going to carry a lot of sway in those markets, whereas they're going to carry sway in other markets too, but not as much. So, like I said, the most prestigious firms that are in like New York and DC and LA, big markets, they're going to recruit nationally and they're going to target high law schools. But then they're also going to target the local law schools and target the best students at those law schools, right? And so, being here in Salt Lake, we recruit a ton from BYU and Utah, and then we do a little bit more outside of Utah with kind of our national recruiters. But we recruit I'm trying to think the past. So what they're called summer associates. They come in and they work for the law firm for a summer, and they basically test it out. The law firm tests them out. They test the law firm out, and then the law firm will usually make them an offer at the end of the summer if everything goes well. Most of our summer associates have been from BYU. There have been a couple from UVA, but most have been from BYU. There's been a couple from Utah. So we do a lot of local recruiting at the local law schools. So it just, like I said, and that can be a little bit hard, right? Because you don't know exactly what you want to do immediately if you haven't gone to law school. But I would say if you want to keep your options open, you want to have the most options available to you. Going to a good law school or a high-ranked law school can preserve those options. But again, it's the money for law school is a real thing. It's something you should take seriously, because it does affect your decisions on what you do. Taking all of those student loans if you don't have a scholarship or anything like that. So, It's important things to consider, and that's where I think, talking to other lawyers and seeing what they've done and kind of what their advice is super helpful. I'm really grateful I went to UVA. I think it was a great law school. I had a great experience. I have a great network of friends and people outside of Utah now. I grew up in Utah, and so for me, it was a little bit like, well, I've grew up here. I went to BYU. I need to get out and try something new. But it's a decision that it was right for me, but it wasn't right for everybody, right? It just depends on what you want to do and what you want your experience to be.
Lightning round? Somebody else.
Any other questions before we do lightning round?
Lightning round. You can do questions after lightning round.
Okay. All right.
So they haven't done this yet before.
Okay.
Wait. Oh shoot. What are we talking about? I have my little cord. All right. Here's how this works.
Okay.
I'm just going to read through these questions, and you're going to answer as fast as you can.
Oh my gosh, this is a lot of pressure.
You
All
should
right.
have put these up on the board, but.
Okay. That's right. That's right.
And then see if we can go over more questions. This is just because it's fun for me. What is the worst professional advice that you've ever been given?
Oh, worst professional advice I've ever been given. See, I'm already flaking under. The worst professional advice. Probably. That money matters, right? And I would say it's the worst advice because it does matter, obviously, but there's things that matter so much more than that, right? Like professional fulfillment, what you want to do. You'll figure out a way to make it work if you're doing and chasing down and having that fulfillment. But I got some advice before of like, well, this is an easy decision. You can make a lot of money here and you can't make a lot of money there, so you should go that way. And I don't think that's always the best advice.
What is the practice you adopted in college that has served you well?
Being able to pull all-nighters. Just kidding. Probably taking notes, really. I mean, because I took notes feverishly in law in undergrad, and whether that be, I usually took them by hand. Sometimes I would do on a laptop, but that has served me well because you're always taking notes as a lawyer, whether you're listening to a judge or meet and confer or whatever. So taking notes.
Is there any professional crossroads you faced, which if you faced it again, you would do the opposite thing?
So I was talking to my wife about this last night, and no, I don't think so. Because even there was one that we were talking about in particular where I did something that I at the time regretted. But looking back at it now, I realize it got me to something better, or got me to where I am now, and I don't think I would have gotten there had I taken that kind of detour.
What was
So.
the next one?
Yeah, so I went to a law firm. I kind of, when I was leaving California, I went somewhere that was not my first choice, but I kind of got a little bit panicked about being able to come back to Utah and kind of establish a legal career here, and I probably made a decision that was a bit rash. But it helped me kind of, again, I ended up at this place that I met great people and I established great relationships. I figured out it wasn't exactly what I wanted to be doing, but it led me to where I am now, working with people who I absolutely love and doing something that has been super fulfilling for me.
What is the best piece of media you've consumed in 2025?
2025, Severance. So I was late to the game on Severance, and I am going to watch the last episode of the second season this weekend, and I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
What kind of person would you recommend law school to?
Honestly, I would go back to those three things that I mentioned before. People looking for those three things. So versatility, steep learning curve, and the ability who get a rush from being up in front of people and debating. Right. That's I'd recommend it to. And you'll notice though that fits a wide variety of people. Right. I was the very typical law student. I did political science. I did, Russian, maybe not as typical, but political science. I had a lot of like legal internships in my background, and I went to law school, right? But I have a colleague, for example, who she majored in music theory and went to a conservatory at Oxford and learning on the harp, and now she's a patent litigator, right? So like, you really can go to law school with any type of background. If you like hard sciences and you like the way things work and from a mechanical perspective, IP law is a great fit, right? And so you really can be a good lawyer with a bunch of different backgrounds.
Has she ever used the harp?
She has.
Wow.
So she's not in any sort of like court case or anything like that, but at like charity events when she's been on like charity boards and things like that, she's played the harp. She also plays for, it's not the Utah Symphony, but it's one of the symphonies here in Utah. She plays for it and does it on the side. So lawyers can have lives outside of their work.
Is there a day at BYU, a single day at BYU that you still remember?
Not necessarily a single day, but I just remember very clearly, walking on BYU's campus at fall. That was always the best time, is the fall football season. The leaves are changing. It's not so hot. I just remember going to like, a big seminar class, whether it was like American Heritage or Econ 110, and then I would, after my brain was just like hurting, I would go over to the store over here in the Wilk, and I would get a bagel and I would get a cookies and cream milk. And I remember those BYU cookies and cream milk. They were just so that like reminds me of like BYU and being on campus. And then I would come over here and I'd get a New York Times from this building, and I would go read the New York Times, eat my bagel, and drink my cookies and cream milk. That was always like, that's what I think of when I think of BYU.
That is the most BYU story ever.
Isn't it? I know.
Do you ever still read Russian literature?
I do. Not as much in Russian anymore, but I do. I just read the other, let's see, this is probably 6 months ago now, but Dead Souls by Gogol. If you've never read that book before, it's a great book. It's I know you don't usually hear this, but it's a funny Russian book. It's very dark humor, but it is funny, so recommend.
2 final questions, second last question. Were you happier in undergrad law school or in your career?
Probably, I think undergrad was probably, I mean, that was the only reason. No, I wouldn't say I'm happier in any part of those, or any time of life. That's one thing that like is great about growing old and getting older and encountering new things is it's not better, it's just different, right? So like, but you're like, oh shoot. No, it's just, I mean, it's different, right? For me, like, there were things that I really miss about undergrad, and that if I could like pause my life right now and go back to undergrad for like 3 weeks, I totally would do it. But I don't think I'd go back permanently, if that makes sense, because I love where I'm at now, and I don't want to give it up.
All right, we're at time. The last question is, if you could persuade the people in this room of one thing, only one thing, what would it be?
That Tillamook ice cream is the best.
Okay, it's going to be the Tillamook.
So.
Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you.